Okay, so I am going to record this, and what we're going to get started, and I don't think we're going to finish it, is 12.1, update the trip log app. And so this builds on top of 8.1, an exercise we did in 8.1 for chapter 8, right? And so it uses multiple related entities rather than a single trip entity. And I took 5 minutes to just open up 8.1 and kind of refamiliarize myself with that before I got started here. Okay, so again, start with 8.1, open it up. Obviously got to do 8.1 first, and that's our starting point. And so to kind of start here, it says use the package manager console to create a new database named triplog2 based on the migration file for the triplog database from 8.1. Okay, so I guess we can just spin up. We've got 8.1 open up, and if I open up 8.1, you know, it's talking about the migration file. So there is a migration file. It's called initial, and there's also a snapshot. I think we just need this migration file right here. So you can, if you got that open, you can right click and open containing folder to kind of open that up in Windows, and it'll bring you here. And I'm just going to copy that file, and then when I spin up a new lab in Visual Studio, create a new project, call this chapter 12 project, trip log 2. Go ahead and add a folder called migrations. Normally it's created for us. Make sure to spell that right. And now, since I've copied, let me see if I can just paste, and that gets that file in there. And this will be what we need to create a table named trips, but I have to configure my connection string and a bunch of other things. So tools, install our packages. So we'll install the entity framework core tools that we've done probably 100 times by now. And install SQL Server. Now in our app settings, this is where we're going to add our connection string and our database name. Database name, we'll call it triplog2. So I recommend copying and pasting again. So I've got this opened up from 8.1. Just going to copy and paste from 8.1 my connection string and then rename the database. Paste and triplog2. So database triplog2. And I suppose triplog2 context. So that will at least create the database. To create the database. Now, obviously we're going to be modifying this database with different design, but we've got that. Let's go ahead and bring in our what we need in program CS. Which, if we scroll to the top, using Microsoft Framework Core, using trip log 2 models. Again, copying and pasting here, updating the connection string. The name of it is trip log 2 context, and the class is trip log 2 context. That class doesn't exist yet. So let's copy that. Name trip log 2 context, and our models, add a class, trip log 2 context. We don't have the class of trip yet. No.
Josh, you said it was just at the end of the hall.
Yeah.
Yeah, all the way down there, it's the last story, right? You're looking at it.
So I'm just going to create a trip entity with, I'm going to have to fill in the blanks, right? Because the destination is now its own class. Accommodations are now their own class and table. So I'm just going to make this class called trip. We'll make it a trip ID. So if I just take my trip class from before, I'm gonna take things out, right? So this is what I had before in my trip class. I'm gonna take things out about the other destinations and accommodations and activities. Well, that's everything. Destinations, accommodations, and activities. Take out destination, accommodation. Okay, well we still have dates, so trips have dates. Again, we're taking out accommodations and we're taking out activities. All that's really left is our trip ID, our start date, and our end date. And I accidentally got rid of the required on the start date. That makes sense. That makes sense. Okay, now that's recognized. Okay, just getting to the point where we can create the database. It has a trip table. But now that I'm thinking about this a little bit more, I'm sitting over here deleting fields, but I bet you since our initial has all these, we're going to need all this, right? Our trips for right now are going to need all of that, right? So I'm actually going to put that back in to get that to work. And then we'll refactor it as we go. So just use the trip class like it was. We're just creating another database.
Wouldn't it just be more efficient to just make a whole new migration and that works with the trip?
I'm just following the instructions. Trying to anyways. So let's build. Got a failed error message. Trip log 2. Trip log 2. Try again. Trip log 2. Now the fun begins. Okay, next step is I'm going to go ahead and add the subfolders that we kind of saw in the exercise 12.1. So those subfolders were domain models. So I'll add a folder called domain models. And for example, our trip can go into domain models. And adjust the namespace, yes. And we also had a subfolder called data access. Had a folder called data access. And we put our context file in there. And we need a using statement using trip log 2 models. Now we need that subfolder domain models. And we'll keep that for now, just those folders. So we've got that bullet checked. Now we just have 10 more bullets. I'm being a little sarcastic. How many are there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 more bullets. Add a destination entity that has a one-to-many with trip. That is, a trip can only have one destination, but a destination can be associated with more than one trip. Configure the foreign key trip entity so that attempting to delete the destination that's associated with the trip throws an error. We did that. Use package manager consoles to add migrations, update the database. Note, you'll need to adjust the controllers and views so the project will build. In our domain models, we're going to add class called destination. Okay, so we have our class of destination, and we'll add a primary key. Now again, the relationship is as such. We're going to have a destination ID, public int primary key. Okay, so if I go into trip, should be able to delete the destination. What else had a destination? I'm just looking at what else I need to take out. So this is the destination. I think that's all we're gonna have to take out is this destination field. Accommodation, trip date, accommodation, and activities. So yeah, so I'm going to take out this destination. And we're going to need a destination name that IntelliSense is pretty good. Now, the convention that we've mostly been using isn't table name and property name, it's just name. And we'll set it to be string empty and required now. Destination can have many trips, so a collection of trips, but a trip can only have one destination, so we're going to wire it up I collection of trip called trips get and set, and kind of the recommendation the book made is to explicitly initialize this collection on the constructor. So you can do that by setting the trips equal to new I collection of type trip. You need to actually be more explicit. I think they always said hash set. There we go.
Can you explain what that is essentially doing? I don't really know why you need that.
Essentially, this is null until you initialize it to be a list, right? So there's really, this is explicitly saying, okay, call the set block of this trips property and start it as an empty list, if you will.
Gotcha.
Right? So we have a collection, a list of trips. It's kind of like having a list. If you were to imagine just like a list of trip, called trips, semicolon. Like you got the left side, but you don't have the right side.
Right, you're just initializing it, but
To be an
not
empty.
putting any data in it.
With no data in it.
Cool.
And on the other side, so this is the destination can have many trips, but now we need to go into trip and add a destination, right? So kind of here, prop destination called destination. This is the FK property. To get rid of that, you do the equals null get your semicolon.
Yeah, how are these doing?
Too short.
Okay, so let's go add a destination. So it has a one-to-many relationship with trip. A trip has one destination, but a destination can have more than one trip. Configure the foreign key. Okay. Configure the foreign key in the trip entity so that attempting to delete a destination with the trip throws an error. Configure the foreign key in the trip entity so that attempting to delete a destination that's associated with the trip throws an error. So we need to stop that cascading on delete, and that is done with that API call. Let's pull up the right page. Fluent API, restricting that. Finding the right page. There it is. 467. On model creating. Configure the trip entity. So this is on model creating of our context. Wait a minute. On model creating of our seed data. So we don't have the method on model creating. And so we have been putting that seed data in their own classes, and so we can do that here. So inside of models, we have data access, and let's add another subfolder since we're organizing configuration. And let's add a class here, trip config. And let's add some using statements. Now this interface that we bring in here, whoops. There we go. So I had to bring in this using statement domain models and implement the interface. So the trip entity has one destination with many. Destination has trips. On delete behavior, restrict. Okay, so we've done this. Configure the foreign key in the trip entity so attempting to delete a destination that's associated with a trip throws an error. Use the package manager console to add a migration and update the database. Note you'll need to adjust the controllers and views so it will build. So let's build this and see what's unhappy.
Should be fine because we started with a fresh one.
Yeah.
It literally did build on top of.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, because we don't have any of our controllers or anything like that. We'll have to rebuild a lot of that, or bring it over at least. Okay, now this trip config needs to be pointed at from our context. So in the context, bring in on model creating. And we also need our destination, right? Public db set destination destinations. And let's see what works. Add migration, added destinations. Okay. I had a typo in my primary key. Destination ID. T-I-N-H-T-I-O-N. Destination. I just spelled it wrong. Build solution. Package manager console. Add migration again. Now that I don't have a typo, we're happy. Update database. Hey, what's up, Vinny?
So mine, because it's using the same like file from the other lab.
I copied and pasted. I didn't use the same one.
Okay, I'll put it on.
I need to drop my trip log 2. So the update database command reverts the database to the migration. Yeah. I'm just going to drop my database. Log 2. Drop hyphen database. Trying to do it through the console. We'll do it this way. There's already an object named trips in the database. So let me look at this file. Create table destinations, create table trips. It's running create table trips twice. And so if I look here, it must be running it once from here, initial, and a second time from added destinations.
That's what it looks like. 'Cause
Yeah, that's what it
even
looks
on
like.
There, I still have under my trip log 2 database, I still have the dpo.trips with data from the other initial file.
Yeah, there's no harm in just deleting this because
Yeah.
it was just one. So let's just delete that initial. I'm gonna drop the database. There we go. We got there. Just had to work through the errors. Trip log 2, tables, destination and trips. There's a command that I was also looking for that I reminded myself of. Update database 0. Basically runs the down method on all the migration files. So that's something else to keep in mind. I was looking for that command. Okay. Bullet number 2 is done. also kind of want to look at the file here, and here you see on delete restrict. That's what I wanted to see. I'll close all tabs. Add an accommodation entity that has a one-to-many relationship with trip. That is, a trip can only have one accommodation, but an accommodation can be associated with more than one trip. Configure the foreign key in the trip so that it's tempting to delete it. Throws an error, make the phone and email properties of the accommodation optional. Use the package manager to update the database. So now I think this time I don't think we'll get that. Hopefully we don't get that repetitive, creating the same table twice. So let's add accommodation. Accommodation ID. The name. Said some optional fields, right? So phone and email are optional, so they're not required, and they're nullable. Okay, again, it's the one-to-many. So an accommodation has a collection of trips. And in the constructor, arrow trips equals new hash set trip. So we got to go back into trip and add the accommodation. All right, a trip has a single accommodation. Accommodation has a bunch of trips. So now we go back into trip, and after the destination, let's extract accommodation. Delete that. Accommodation phone and email. Let's replace that. We also want to set the validate never on the nav properties. Okay. Ba, 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 ba. Configure the foreign key and trip so that attempting to delete accommodations that are associated with a trip throws an error. So that is back in our configuration of trip. This is the destination foreign key. And this is accommodation. Trip has one T accommodation. Okay. Check. Use PMC to add a migration to update the database. Okay. So now, hopefully we don't get the same error that we were getting last time. Add migration. Add added accommodations. It's interesting. Now they start with drop, then they create okay, so we are dropping column. That makes sense, right? That's out of the trips table, right? So we're dropping columns out of trips, dropping columns out of trips. Good. Adding accommodation ID, creating table accommodation, referring, okay. That actually might be more in line with what we need. Update database. Cool. Close. Refresh. So a trip has a primary key with two foreign keys. The trip has many accommodations, or has an accommodation. A trip has a destination. 1. Now this is all empty, but it's ID. Trip has a destination ID and a accommodation ID. Looking good?
So what is this useful for that we couldn't have done with the other file that we had, the other context file?
Well, so part of this is just kind of going through these, like adding migrations and what is this going to do any different?
Yeah.
Nothing.
I mean, you could like visually show us because I mean I see it. I just am kind of confused on like why we would use this.
Nothing. So it comes down to like, okay, we had one table, we were storing everything in it. And now we're not. We have 3 tables, right? Or maybe even more, 4 or 5.
Okay.
And so like that answer to your question is why would you store everything in multiple tables versus the one table
Gotcha.
is what I'm hearing. Are you with me? Because I don't think the app functionality is going to function any different,
Okay.
right? It's really just an efficiency with the data,
Yeah.
right? You'll have less repetitive data. You're not going to store the Hyatt accommodation 15 times. You're going to store Hyatt once.
Okay.
Keep in mind that's how normalized databases work. Keep in mind that Mongo and those Mongo doesn't really care that you're storing data repetitively,
Yeah.
right? And so, like these normalized databases are efficient for old systems, and so Mongo is just kind of a newer approach. Did I address
No,
or answer your question? Okay, cool. Okay, add an activity that has a many-to-many. All right, something new. Activity that has many-to-many with trip. That is, a trip can have more than one activity. An activity can be associated with more than one trip. Mongo's a NoSQL database, right? It's ultimately not normalized. It's like, oh, you're going to store your customer information 15 times? Go ahead. We got plenty of room. Ooh, we get to add a data layer, update the trip to allow users to delete trips. So we'll have to scaffold. I mean, we'll have to build all this stuff out because we started fresh. And we'll probably just continue this on Monday. We're not going to finish it today, but we got a good jump start, which is all we could ask for. Oh, let's before we close up. I gave you hope, but let's do this activity. Let's do this activity.
My computer won't open back up. Oh. Guess I gotta go home.
He's like pulling at it really fast.
Add a class called activity. Activity ID, of course. Name.
You know, you're like the only person I know that uses the insert key. I've never in my life met somebody that does that.
I don't use the insert key.
Well, because you press insert and then you're able to backspace prior to delete key.
I hold shift
Oh.
or a backspace. You talking about just
Yeah, 'cause,
backspace?
like, you'll backspace from like front to forward.
That's the delete key.
Okay.
It's all good. And okay, so it's a many-to-many, right? So we have a collection of trips. Public I collection of trips called trips. Get and set. constructor says, hey, call the trip set block equal to a new Okay, so now on the trip side, let's open up trip. So this is our many to many. We are deleting activity 1, 2, 3 and bringing in our what's called a skip nav property. Sounds like something else. What is skip nav? Prop I collection of activity called activities. Now this is where my brain is going. I don't have the answer. I'm just going to ask the question. I've never heard of a table, one table that has many to many relationships. And I'm just saying, is it feasible? And I think it is. We could just, not going there, but it's feasible. I think, okay, moving on. Public trip, because what we have to do here is set activities equal to new hash set of activity.
Do you want to declare activities as null or no? Same way we did for
No. Did we do that on other one?
Oh, okay. I'm silly.
So now we have between trip and activity, we have a many to many. And again, there's a lot of convention that happens behind the scenes. It'll make that join table for us. That join table will have specific names of the columns, and it's good to be aware of those names. So we'll take a look at that when we run our migration. Again, activity has trips, and we initialize that, and trip has activities, and we initialize that. Let me double check the requirements. Add an activity that is going to use the PMC to add a migration and update the database. So, okay, so that makes sense, right? You might lose data if you drop columns. We're dropping columns, so that error makes sense to me. Create table activity. Create table activity trip. There's our join table. Activities, activity ID. Trips, trip ID. And that is what I would expect. Update database. Bingo. Let us look at our tables. And we've got trips, destination, activity, activity trip is that join table. Very good. All right, that's a good way to send us off for a 3-day weekend. Yes.
I remember in a few times before,
Yep.
whenever we used the joint ticket, we had to make those ourselves.
Yep.
So with doing it this way, where you
Yeah.
declare the many-to-manys, it does it for you.
Yeah. Bingo. You just make the many-to-many relationship in the model, and it makes it for us. Have a great 3-day weekend, guys. We'll finish this up when you get back.